And so with that, let's turn our attention to our brother Livre, who has entitled his exhortation this morning, Goods. Brother Livre.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Guys, you guys are going to have to give me just a little bit more than that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Perfect. Much better. That's one of the ways I usually start practice with my boys. Boys, how are we doing today? Good. Like, boys, come on. Come on. Yeah. So this was yesterday, actually. I was coaching in Romeoville. My 2015s had a game, so like U8, U9, and right after a game, I decided that I was gonna, watch one of the other games that was taking place. The game was taking place at a complex, and it's shaped so that there's two games all taking place at the same time, because the majority of the kids playing there are very young, right, and can be running a whole lot. So it's like one big field separated into two fields. And after my game, I went to watch the next game over. It was 2013 boys, so like U12, like 12, 13 years of age. And I sat there, watch the game. I knew the coach, obviously, but more than knowing the coach, right, is, to me, it's always a matter of like how, what can I learn from other coaches, right? And in terms of like the game overall. And I sat down and watching the game. As the game is progressing, right, I made an observation. The team that one of the coaches that I knew that he was coaching, most of the kids were of equal amount of ability. Like they were all on the same level as far as really playing was concerned. But one thing stood out in particular. So as the game is going on, the two teams are battling, going at it, right, back and forth, one team scores, other team scores, one team scores, other team scores, and then eventually towards the end of the game, with about I want to say a minute left, the score was 3-5. The score was 3-5, and the team that one of the coach that I knew was coaching, they were behind, they were losing, and with a minute left, they managed to get a goal, and like they were celebrating, they thought that 30 seconds left, they might be able to make something happen, and the other team, upon realizing that the score is 4-5, they decided that with the 30 seconds, a minute left, we're just gonna, waste time basically with the ball so that, they don't take any chances, any risk. Kickoff started, one of the players on the ball, literally kicked the ball, literally just kicked the ball. The clock went down, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the buzz went off, the game ended. The final score ended up being 4-5. But what I noticed though is the losing team. Obviously, the boys, heads were down. The team that won was celebrating. The boys, walked off the field. The coach, was, just trying to put on a smile, but like you could tell that it was like he would have rather won the game, and the coach is walking out, and in particular, I noticed a kid crying. I noticed a kid crying, and as the coach is walking outside the door, the dad of the kid, like he was furious, like he was like mad, like aggravated, like as the coach is walking outside the door, right? Like the dad looked like he was gonna like fight, like hit somebody. It's like, Coach, what did you do, Coach? What did you do? You only played him for 5 minutes. Like, look at him, he's crying. And I walked away, but I was observing like what was going on between the two. Like they were not having it. Like, I'm looking for far off, and it's like, going back and forth. Like the kid was crying too, literally next to them. the coach, trying to, comfort the kid, like, just wait, next time, and next time it's gonna come. And coach walks off. I knew the coach, so I proceeded, to have a discussion with him. So what happened? It's like the kid, I put him on the field, I put the kid on the field, but he didn't want to run. Like, he didn't want to run. I asked him, I was like, that's all? Yeah, like he looked like he couldn't run. Like, he didn't want to run at all. And so I put him on the field, and because he didn't want to run, I just decided that I was gonna play a different kid. And it's like the coach was like little pointing out, right? His whole point was that the kid was not trying. That was little the whole basis of like why ended up subbing the kid out. And I thought to myself, wow, that's man, I've yet to be in that type of situation, because with my boys, I try to encourage a little bit more, talk a little bit more. If I give them less time, maybe at least 10 minutes, but five minutes seemed brutal. Okay, we'll come back onto that story in a little bit. Now, going to regarding the focus of what it is that we're trying to focus on this morning, right? It's going to be precisely the parable of the talents, But before I get into it, right? One thing I'd been processing, as I was looking into the parable of the talents, right, was precisely this question, this notion. Like, if Christ lived today, like what profession would Christ be? Like, what would Christ be doing for work today? I know it's a rhetorical question, putting it out there, right? But depending on who you ask, you might get different answers. I was talking to Lawi yesterday, and I literally asked him the same question. Lawi pointed out that Jesus will be a motivational speaker. And I thought, I never thought about it that way, but that's interesting, Because of the nature of his work, right? Physically speaking, we know he was a carpenter. The equivalent to what we have to somebody being a carpenter today will probably be remodeling, right? Construction. And that may or may not be. Others would say a civil rights activist, social welfare activist, because from the account of his life, he cared a lot about people. So very compassionate. And that may be the case, but from what I thought, like, if Christ was to live today, I may not be right, but I think Christ will be in the filmmaking industry. Yeah, I think Christ will be the filmmaking industry, and part of the reason I say that, right, is because of the different parables, stories that he shared, and the closest thing that we have, to literally a whole bunch of parables today would probably be movies, stories, which are told through movies, right, essentially. So I don't know, some working at Disney, I don't know, Paramount, Hollywood, maybe. Yeah, but that's precisely why, right? And so parables, right? Okay, parables. What are parables? A few questions just roaming, right off the bat, right on top of my mind, right? Like, what are parables? What are parables meant for? Why are parables important? Parables, are they any in the Old Testament? Like, how many parables all combined all throughout the scriptures? Those are some of the things that we're gonna ponder this morning, and beyond that as well. Specifically, it's gonna be with regards to the parable of the talents. Okay, so yeah, moving forward, right? I guess first things first. Like, well, what's a parable? What's a parable? And from my take, right? Like, a parable, essentially what it is, it's a story. Okay, it's a story meant to convey certain truths about the hearers oftentimes. Okay, now with regards to Christ himself, oftentimes when Christ was sharing or telling a parable, it tended to be a story with truth, with elements of truth to it, as well as upcoming kingdom as well. So Christ's upcoming kingdom. And because the parable comes in the form of a story, right? The hearers, the people hearing the story, often have the dilemma, often have the opportunity to be able to, place themselves in the story and then eventually be able to, make a decision. Now, in the account, throughout the scriptures, right? Old Testament, there are parables in the Old Testament, as well as the New Testament. In the New Testament, it's estimated that anywhere between 35 to 40. In the Old Testament, it seems like there isn't a whole lot, okay? But I was able to come up with quite a few as well. So in the Old Testament, at least, a few, I'm sure there's a whole lot other parables out there, but a few that I was able to come up with right off the bat were the parable of David, when Nathan confronts David, about how David wronged his neighbor, how David basically wronged someone as a king. There's the parable of the wise widow from Tekoa, in the book of 2 Samuel 14, verse 1 to 11. The wise widow from Tekoa, basically the whole parable, the whole purpose of it basically being to, seek mercy for Solomon. Not Solomon, but to seek mercy for King Absalom, I believe. There's also the parable of the prophet who condemned Ahab as well, 1 Kings 20. 1 Kings 20, starting at verse 35. In Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1 through 7, we read about the fruitless vineyard. The whole premise, the whole point of the parable being, God's disappointing vineyard, Israel, as it did not produce the intended fruit that was meant to produce. We have the parable of the boiling pot, in Ezekiel 24, 3-5 as well. And I'm sure there's a whole lot other more as well. With the boiling pot parable, basically the whole point being meat placed in the pot representing Israel, as well as due to its preceding sins as a form of judgment. So there's a whole lot other parables out in the Old Testament as well, but in the New, we find a whole lot of parables in the New Testament. Okay. Now, like I said earlier, for the purpose of exhortation this morning, right, we're going to focus on the talents, the parable of the talents. And looking at the parable of the talents, right? Contextually speaking here, if we go one chapter earlier, really, Matthew 24, verse 1, then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the building of the temple. Okay? And as far as context is concerned, that we do see that Christ is talking to his disciples, about this parable. So, with the opening remarks, right, of the parable, Christ points out that the kingdom of heaven, shall be likened, verse 14, chapter 25, verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country. A man traveling to a far country. Okay? And this man traveling to a far country entrusted his servants. Okay? We're told that there's three of them. Entrust his servants with talents, with goods. Okay? The first one gets 5, the second one gets 2, the last one gets one. Okay, we read of a similar account in Luke. We read of a similar account in Luke 19, right? And as far as the distinction between the two, the objective of the parable is really still the same. Okay, it was interesting for me as I was looking through it, right? Because one thing I was wondering as I was going through the talents, right, was, okay, how much is a talent worth? Like how, I'd always thought that a talent was like a day's wage. Here, take this for the day, multiply it. Do what I have to do to multiply it. But then looking more in depth with it, it was very fascinating. Like I find it fascinating. So I basically came to find out that one talent, from my commentary notes at least, one talent was equal to 6,000 denarius. Okay, 6,000 denarius. If you come with me to Matthew 20, Matthew 20, verse 2. Matthew 20, verse 2. Now, when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Okay, Matthew 20, verse 2, I guess kind of give us a hint of how much a denarius will be worth, right? Like a day's wage. Okay, so a talent, 6,000 denarius, a denarius, a day's wage. Okay, for my math people out there, right? Okay, if we take the 6,000 denarius, 6,000 days essentially, we divide that by 365 days in a year. Okay, we get about 16.6, around 17 if we round it off. Okay, so one talent essentially is equal to about 17 years worth of salary. So that's a lot. That's a lot. Like imagine your salary, multiplied by 17 times. Okay, you're given that to manage. That is what's going on here. That is what's going on here. Imagine being the first guy, right? Okay, you take your current salary and you multiply by 85 years. That's literally how much the first, that's how mind-blowing this, I find it. Okay, and in the Minas parable, like I said earlier, the practical lesson is still the same, right? With the Minas, what I find out about the Minas is that one mina was equivalent to about 4 months worth of payment, 4 months worth of income, basically. Which that in itself is still a lot. Okay, the practical lesson is just by being able to read about the two accounts is that the principal message still remains, and that is this noble man is entrusting these people with items of value, like a lot of wealth essentially. And so Christ often told parables to reveal certain truth about himself as well as the kingdom. And in the parable, Christ is that man. Christ is that man. And he was here now on earth, okay? He would live, after being resurrected, right? Is, heaven. And then eventually it's gonna come back. So Christ is that noble man, is that man. And so if Christ is that man, then part of the question becomes what are the goods? What are Christ's goods, right? And for me, I was also fascinated too, because just being able to read the scriptures right off the bat. If you had asked me what are the goods, in this particular account, I would have told you that the goods were probably referred to the Christ's words. That would have been my first, initial reaction, my first initial response. But then, when I think about it that way, it's like, okay, if the goods are Christ's words, okay, how am I supposed to multiply on Christ's words? We're commanded, right, in the Deuteronomy as well as Revelation, not to take or not to add, okay, to what's in here. So, the goods, right? The goods, and practical sense, in the modern world that we live in, right? Goods often refer to merchandise, one's possessions. That is what goods are, literally the definition of goods. But in this particular instance, right, because Christ is trying to make a point, what are the goods? As far as the goods are concerned, it does say in the same chapter, even though it wasn't read up here, but it was pointed out in the same chapter. So if you come with me in the same chapter, Matthew 25, starting at verse 31, we'll read a few verses there, and then we're going to skip a few other verses forward. Matthew 25, verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Okay. Verse 37. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" Okay, verse 40, that's the key. Verse 40 reads, "And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly, I said to you, inasmuch as you did to one of the least of these my brethren, you did to me." Okay, so that's a key characteristics there of what the goods are referring to. Okay, Christ's brethren, which essentially be referring to the ecclesia, right? Believers. And it's interesting. It's interesting too, because one of these discussions that we had a Bible study, just can't remember if a couple of weeks back, was precisely trying to answer this question, right? Like when thinking in terms of like what really God cares about, like does God care more about his people, or does God care more about his truth? And it's not one or the other. It's one or the other, right? God cares about people that do care about his truth, because who's gonna carry the truth? Who's gonna carry the legacy? Okay, if there's nobody, essentially. So the people are required, and the believers are required to carry God's truth, and therefore God cares more for his people because they care about the truth, about his truth. So that's the goods there that just being able to like see context, being able to read everything is in terms of like what's been referred to. Yeah. And so then going back, right? Okay, going back to the few of the guys, they were entrusted with the goods. Okay, the first two were able to multiply on what it is that they had. Okay, now what does that mean for us? Okay, what does that mean for me and you? You know, like, how do we multiply on Christ's goods, Christ's ecclesia? We are giving a hint of how truly just to go about that. You know, First Peter 4:10. First Peter chapter 4, verse 10. Verse 10 is the key, but I'm going to start from verse 7, just because the whole parable just reads very, very, very beautiful. Starting at verse 7, but the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers, and above all things have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. Verse 10, as each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracle of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it as with the ability which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Yeah. Practical lessons for us, right? You know, being able to serve each other, being able to serve Christ's brethren. And with the accounts of the three guys, especially the last servant that was given just one talent, it's interesting, right? Because if you read off the account, like one may raise up the question of like unfairness, like, oh, you only got one, like, wasn't that unfair? The fact that you only got one. Okay, but the scripture tells us that they were both given according to their ability. They were all given according to their ability. And in Matthew 25, (26), same chapter again. But his Lord answered and said to him, speaking to the last servant with one talent, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I've reaped where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming, I will have received back my own with interest. Like, he knew what type of master he was serving. And to look at this and point out that there's unfairness, first of all, it was given according to his ability, right? But besides that as well, he chose, like, he didn't even try. He didn't even try. Back to the kid that got only 5 minutes of play, right? Yeah, he only just 5 minutes of play. He chose not to, even though the majority of the boys are all of same ability in skill. Yeah. That's another practical lesson for us as well. How much of an effort are we giving when it comes to serving each other? Now, don't get me wrong, right? There's a distinction there. Working for salvation, right? That's now what I'm getting at. But it's more so in terms of how much of an effort are we really giving when it comes to serving each other? Peter reminded us earlier that we all have different gifts, right? Preach. If hospitality, just give the best you got. That's a good practical lesson for us. And back to this whole idea, this whole notion of parables as well. Part of reading the parables, right? Like, I don't know, some of us may be able to identify with the guys that got 5, maybe some of us 2, some of us 1, but particularly the ones that are kind of feel like the last servant, right? Like we have a choice, right? Like we can't, just maybe just because, in the past we've wronged our brethren, like we've, not done things correctly, all of a sudden we start feeling like we have nothing to offer, nothing to contribute. That's not the case. And again, part of reading the parable, right, is placing ourselves in those stories and essentially eventually be able to repent if the occasion calls for it. So in conclusion here, Christ has entrusted his goods, essentially his people, his church, his most valuable resources, right? We all have different gifts and abilities we were given. Part of what Christ is requiring from us is our effort in terms of maximizing the talent we've been given. To my point earlier, right? Is it hospitality? Is it visiting, checking in on others? Is it preaching? The list goes on. How faithful will we remain, until it comes?